Jesse just got real with you all.
Welcome everyone to episode number 90 of the Average Ontario Anglers Fishing Podcast. This is a special episode because this is our year-end wrap-up. We're going to go through some of the stuff that's happened over the last year. We're going to talk about some changes that are happening in the new year on this podcast. But before we get into that super interesting episode topic of podcast statistics, just kidding. It's actually pretty interesting. We're going to have Andrew, our co-host of the day, give us the interesting fishing fact. Dazzle me.
Well, I figured this is going to be like a super good episode, so I wanted to focus on some fish superpowers.
Ooh.
And I'm not talking like, activate swimming power. It's actual superpowers pretty much that these fish have. I tried to focus a lot on fish we obviously have here in Ontario, here in Canada, but I kind of got sidetracked. There's some pretty wicked ones from other places in the world. The first one is walleye. What superpower do you think walleye have, Jesse?
Night vision.
That's right.
Nice.
That's a pretty common one that's known. They have exceptional vision for dark times of the day, at night. That's when they primarily hunt because what they're hunting can't see them. Imagine having a paintball fight, but you have night vision goggles and it's pitch black outside and no one else does. Who's going to win?
Sounds like it's cheating to me.
Replace the night vision goggles with, you have massive jaws with huge teeth and you're targeting dumb perch. Kind of skewed in the walleye's favor there.
Yeah.
The next one, long-nosed gar. They actually have kind of two superpowers. What do you think they are?
The ability to not die ever. They're just fully armored.
Yeah, they have armor plating is one of them.
Oh, sick.
They have, it's called ganoid scales, and it's pretty much like medieval armor. These things can be bulletproof. If they're shot, they can deflect bullets. I'm not saying a head-on bullet, but it has the armor capacity to deflect bullets. They also can breathe air using a vascularized swim bladder and can survive in oxygen-depleted water for up to 2 hours. So because they can gulp air from the surface, they're able to store that air, and that oxygen can be administered into their bloodstream by this special organ. Sturgeon, something we saw recently didn't see in person, but saw on a live scope. Lake sturgeon, what do you think their main power would be?
The ability to crush clams in their throat.
That's a good one. That's a very good one. It's not the one I had picked out for it, though. It's their extreme longevity. They can live for over 100 years. Some, they've even recorded it being over 150 years old. We thought
when they interviewed them, they asked them what their success story for living a long life was, and it was crushing clams in their throat like a boss.
Yeah.
That just sounds like something that some old person would say, though. You're like, how'd you live that long? You're like, well, I ate clams every day and I didn't drink any alcohol. It's like, I'd rather just die early and not do that.
It's crazy because they've been around forever. So same with the gar. They're pretty much swimming dinosaurs, both of them. They both have that armored, those big scales on the top of a sturgeon too. But yeah, they're pretty cool. Here's one that I didn't know had a special ability. A freshwater drum. What do you think its power is?
It's like echolocation or something like that.
So they for one, they can detect their prey, not by means of echolocation, but they have special sensory pores on their head. So if it's buried in silt, they can detect prey that's in the silt in the bottom. But they communicate with each other by a drumming sound, hence being called a freshwater drum. And they contract muscles against its swim bladder, especially during spawning season, to be able to communicate with other fish.
That's so cool. Yeah. I knew it had something to do with making weird noises or something.
Yeah.
That's cool. Imagine if we did that. You see a fish swim by the boat, you're just like, Andrew. Boom, 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 boom.
I try. It normally comes out as a fart, though. Now, this one isn't found in Ontario, but it's so cool I had to include it. The archer fish. Have you heard of this one?
That's that one that shoots water.
Yeah, so this is native to Southeast Asia. They can spit water up to 2 meters or 6.5 feet and knock insects or small creatures off of leaves or branches right into the water so they can eat it. The crazy thing about these guys is they are expert marksmen. So their range is up to 2 meters, but their success rate is 80 to 90% of hitting on the first try. You might think like, okay, like if I threw a dart at a board for only 2 meters away, I could hit it pretty good too. It's like, except for the fact that they have to compensate for light refraction as well. So you know how much of a learning curve, I'm sure you've heard, not that we've done it, but bow hunting for carp like that, or bow fishing for carp. It's tough to know, and it takes a lot of time on the water, experience, to be able to gauge that light refraction of the water as to where that fish actually is versus what you're seeing. These fish do it all the time with 80 to 90% accuracy. That's pretty wicked.
So they have better accuracy than Jeremy Wade, because I was watching one of those, River Monsters episodes, and they were hunting down some fish in the Amazon. I forget what fish it was. The way that they hunted them was with an arrow. Remember that episode? He made his own arrowhead. He made his own arrow.
I think that was Uncharted Waters. It wasn't River Monsters. It was Uncharted Waters.
And he's out there shooting them, and he missed every single time.
Yeah.
And the guide was just laughing at him in like Portuguese. It was funny.
Another one that's native to the similar area, Southeast Asia, is the climbing perch. You ever heard of this one? Also called the tree climbing perch.
I was going to say, let me go out on a limb here. It's a perch that climbs.
Yes. The crazy thing about this, now we've heard of different fish, again, like the gar can be up to 2 hours in no oxygenated water. However, the climbing perch can jump out of the water and grab onto the bark of a tree using specialized pectoral fins to evade predators. They can climb trees, rocks, other obstacles. They can survive up to 6 days out of the water if they can keep its skin moist. That's like a fish 6 days out of the water. It can move up to 1.2 kilometers or 0.75 miles across land.
Wow. That's a long distance.
Yeah. So it can survive where other fish can't, which makes it, if it ever came to North America, especially in the warmer climate side of it, there's a good chance it would just start taking over and spreading, because it can survive in waters that don't have a lot of oxygen or no oxygen, and it can also move to the next body of water on its own.
That's interesting. Some creatures are just amazing.
Nature's cool. Another one that's native to Ontario is the northern pike. One of our favorite species, at least one of mine, that's for sure.
Yes, one of mine too.
What do you think the pike's superpower would be?
Well, I think they're so dang slimy that you cannot grab them. That is a cool superpower.
It is, and it's highly effective against Jesse, but
another superpower I just thought of is they have the ability to somehow and randomly always make one of your fingers bleeds, even if you don't touch it. After I unhook a pike, doesn't matter, one of my fingers is bleeding.
I think instead of those being superpowers, I think pike are just your kryptonite. So the one I had picked out for pike is when you search fastest freshwater fish, often will come up as steelhead or salmon, because for maintaining a speed for a long period of time, yes, they can be very quick. Salmon can be about 10 miles per hour, cruising speed, 10, 11 miles per hour. Pike, they can swim up to 10 miles per hour. However, their strike, when they first start off to attack prey or evade a predator, they have this special two-step system that they have. They turn their body into an S shape and they shoot forward. They can also stop by turning their body into a C shape and they kind of just turn sideways, and they pretty much stop instantly too. The speed at which they can attack or so go from standstill to having feeding or evading is 10 meters per second, which is equivalent to 36 kilometers per hour or 22 miles per hour.
Wow.
That's super quick.
And I'm sure most of us have seen that, like when you're reeling your lure and a pike just literally springs out of nowhere, just like, where did it come from? And that's why a lot of times when you're reeling in your lure and a pike grabs it, it just feels like they just hammer it. It's because they just launched themselves at it. Wow.
A couple other cool facts about pike is they can swallow prey up to half their body length. Again, if it's wider, they'll sometimes choke on it, but for the length of it, they can eat like a small pike that's half their body length. And juveniles, this is a reason why they can be so, not only are they expert predators because of these attributes, but they are also, they can take over an area if they kind of infiltrate it pretty easily. That's why we see a lot of them in the quarters and stuff now, is because the juveniles, they can reach 14 inches in their first year.
Wow.
That's how fast
That's impressive,
they grow.
really.
Yeah.
That is true, because there are a lot of the Kawartha Lakes where established muskie populations are 100% being affected by these pike moving in. Mm-hmm. And just as an example, there's one well, it's not a secret spot, but the Otonabee River that flows out of Rice Lake. We would fish there a lot for bass and stuff. And we just started a few years back, just catching pike all the time there, maybe like 7, 8 years ago. And guys would be like, we would go there specifically for pike. That's how many that we would catch. And guys would be like, oh, you can't be bass fishing. Bass season hasn't opened yet. We're like, we're fishing for pike. And they're like, there's no pike in here. It's like, well, explain the 7 that I just caught this morning. Like, there's a lot. And we were catching pike over 3 feet long sometimes. Mm-hmm. So they've been in there a long time and they're multiplying like crazy. So every time we go, we try to eat as many as we can. Like, we cook them first. We don't just eat them when we catch them, but we do like to, keep some pike when we're fishing the Corthus, because they're, and like, not an invasive species, but pretty much.
They are for that ecosystem. Yeah. The next fish is bowfin.
Ooh.
Bowfin, they're super cool. They're on my bucket list of fish I want to catch.
I've caught a few. They're pretty cool fish. I have to admit, they're probably one of the coolest fish in Ontario.
Absolutely. And the cool thing with them is it's not a new superpower we haven't talked about, but they can, again, breathe air. So they can live in oxygen-poor waters, but they can also deal with extreme conditions. So unlike a lot of these other species that can do so, but they live down in the southern hemisphere, things like that, they can survive from 5 degrees Celsius to 30 degrees Celsius, or 41 Fahrenheit to 86 degrees Fahrenheit. Like, wow. That's that's what we experience here in Canada, but they can stay in like the super 30 degrees Celsius water. That's hot. And then to also survive winters, like, that's cold. Yeah. So they can be in like the coldest temperatures versus the hottest, warm, scummy water bodies. Because of that, they can survive pretty well in any body of water, no matter how badly it freezes, pretty much.
That's funny because, like you said, they almost seem like they are fish from the Amazon. Like, they seem so out of place because they're like armor plated. They just look like they should be swimming somewhere in like the Amazon River. But yet they're here in Ontario.
And they have a huge range. They're in North America, the Great Lakes. They're down Mississippi River Basin, all the way down to Florida. These guys exist. And the next one is the mud minnow. So it's found in Ontario, northeastern U.S., down as far south as North Carolina. Guess their superpower, Jesse. This one is actually very impressive.
Are these the fish that literally can dry out completely?
Yes, they
and
can
rehydrate.
They can freeze. They can dry out. They bury themselves in the mud when the water dries up and enter a hibernation-like state, surviving for months without water.
Wow.
They can do anything.
I wish I could do that.
Yeah.
It's like, oh, open water fishing season's over. Just curl up in a mud pile and just freeze up and dry up until the spring and then unthaw. Be like, time to fish.
Now, this one here I saw recently on some other nature show, but I was like, this fish looks hilarious. It's called the four-eyed fish. I want you to take a guess as to what this fish's power is.
It has glasses.
Almost. It only has 2 eyes. However, its pupils are split. So it technically has 4 pupils. 2 are looking above water and 2 are looking below. And this fish pretty much only ever swims on the surface of the water. It's bizarre. So when you watch these videos of these guys, they're just swimming around half out of the water, half underwater. So their eyes can see predators below and prey above, and vice versa. Like, that is so cool. Then they have the desert catfish. Again, similar to the mud minnow, it can survive for very long periods of time, up to 24 hours out of water, and can walk across land. So oftentimes when there is a drought that comes in, these guys and their pond dries up, they just start walking to the next one. So you'll find stories of these. They kind of look like plecos. They're kind of like a subspecies of plecos that you'd have in an aquarium.
Oh yeah, like the sucky fish.
Yeah, but they're like heavily armored. Like they look like a dragon fish or something like that, and they're like black and dark. People will find them in their front yards in like Arizona and stuff because they live in the arid regions of southern U.S. and Mexico. So people will just find them like on the curbside. There's like fish just walking over to the sewer. But yeah, that's some of the superpowers that fish have. Now, I figured at the end of this, we'd each say what power we'd like to have the most. We could only choose one of what we discussed.
I choose the superpower of the northern pike, and I'll tell you why. If I was like the Flash, but in just short bursts, I would be able to get the best deals at any store. Like, say you're like, you see the last certain color crankbait on the shelf, and the guy's like walking towards you, like, sorry, too slow. Or like, you're going to go fishing at the pier and there's only like one spot left and you just zoom in there and you get to the spot. Yeah, I would do that. Think of all the advantages of being able to get something very fast, very quickly. Or like you're backing your boat up off the trailer at the boat launch, it starts drifting away. You're like, no, you're just like, poof, you run back and grab it. You're saved. Or net jobs. Imagine that. The fish is jumping out of the air and the lure flies out of it and you just have the net and you're just like, poof, you shoot over and scoop it up before it hits the water. Oh, you'd thank me so much for being like a northern pike, Andrew.
You know what my power is?
Drying up in the winter? I don't know.
No, I want to be like the tree climbing perch, able to survive to 6 days out of water and climb over obstacles. It'd be nice just to be able to do that sometimes.
Oh, I don't want to burst any bubble, but you probably can already do those things. Andrew's like, I haven't been in water in 6 days. I can smell them from here. And the obstacle thing, I've seen Andrew climb over some obstacles when we go portaging. So yeah, I'd say you're a pretty good dried up perch.
Nice. I'm a tree climbing perch.
Yeah. That was awesome. That is a classic example of an interesting fishing fact. And I like how you dragged in all those fish from Ontario. That's awesome because this is an Ontario fishing podcast. But you have to throw in a few from around the world, Andrew, because we know, as we discussed before, there are a lot of people that listen to this podcast all around the world. I'm not going to go through the list again, but there's people in a lot of different places. So this episode is a 2024 podcast recap. Now I'm going to explain some of this stuff, some of our stats. So like it's the end of the year. We use a podcast streaming host called Buzzsprout, which is one of the most popular ones. And they post the podcast for us on all the platforms. They also keep track of all the statistics and growth and all that kind of stuff. So I'm going to go over some of that stuff. We just, first of all, I'll let Andrew kind of take this over. We would just like to start off by saying we thank everyone so much for listening to this podcast every single week. It means so much to us, doesn't it, Andrew?
Absolutely. Yeah, to have people like it's crazy when people come up and say hi to us when we're, you know, either at a trade show, at a fishing show, or just at the local store, or honking at us on the highway. Like it's awesome when people, not that I care about being recognized, but when people show appreciation for the effort of putting this out and stuff like that, that's awesome. And the best way to do it is to listen, to keep listening. So we do appreciate anyone who's listening right now. And if you have a chance, tell some friends.
Just a few examples of people randomly coming up to us. So like, again, we're always at tackle shops near our house. You know, we're at, Gagnon Sports, Sale, all different places in Southern Ontario. And we go to like, the Sportsman Show, the Spring Fishing Show, CanCast, all that stuff. And obviously at say like CanCast, you're going to get tons of people that come up to us and are like, hey, I listened to the podcast. I think the first year we went to CanCast, we didn't have the podcast. It was before that. And we had a lot of people come up to us be like, oh, I know you from Instagram. That's cool. Or I know you guys, I saw a YouTube video or something like that. Like, yeah. But the second and third year when we went to CanCast, when we actually had the podcast out, we had an amazing amount of people come up to us and not mention anything else but the podcast. I love the podcast. I listened to it. Hey, I know you guys from the podcast. I was at the Sportsman Show. I had people come up to me and it was kind of cool because I was talking to some guys in like the fishing industry, like at the booths, and they'd be like, oh yeah, you have a podcast. Yeah, cool. And then during that conversation, this random guy came up and was like, hey, are you Jesse from Average Ontario Anglers? And I'm like, yeah. Hey, how's it going? And he's like, I love your podcast. I listen to it every week. And then he's like, enjoy the show. And he walked away. And the guy was like, oh, I guess people do listen to your podcast. I was like, yeah, there's at least 3 or 4 people out there.
Joke's on him. I was that planted guy. I walked up and I was like, hey. I'm just kidding.
That'd be funny. I'm just like, thank you, ma'am. I mean, sir. But anyway, the moral of the story is if you guys ever see us wherever, come up and say hi. I had a lot of people that would message me after a show and be like, I saw you guys at, the Sportsman Show, but you looked busy. We're not busy. Believe me, unless someone's literally giving me a boat or something, I'm not busy. Come up and say hi to us. We appreciate it.
I've even been recognized a couple times at work because I do plumbing. So randomly I'll I think it's hilarious. If you recognize me and I'm doing plumbing in your house, just start talking to me about fishing. It makes that job go way better.
Yeah. It's like, man, your toilet's clogged, but you know what? You know what else isn't clogged? Man, I was chucking my tube jig in this hole. It was just as dark as this. It's like, are you that guy from the podcast thing? Like, yeah, guilty. I'm charging you double.
Now you understand my sense of humor.
Now you understand half the stuff I have to cut out of the podcast. Poop jokes. Yeah. So anyway, some of the podcast statistics I would just like to share with you guys because you guys have made this possible. When we started off the podcast 2 years ago, again, we're 90 episodes in. This is season 2. We actually did 40 episodes the first year. We did 50 episodes this year for a grand total of 90 episodes. So compared to our first year, when we started off, we did not know what to expect. We talked about this before. We always talked about having a podcast, right, Andrew? Why? Mm-hmm. People ask me all this all the time because me and Andrew talk all the time. We talk about fishing all the time. It is not something that, we were nervous about at all. Sounds kind of cocky, but we were more nervous about how people would react to it.
Mhm.
But we did think that there was a niche that needed to be filled. And me and Andrew have good chemistry together because, I mean, we're related. We fished together for the last 25 years. Like, come on, we talk. So we were kind of nervous to see what would happen. And instantly after the first few episodes, a lot of downloads, a lot of people messaging us, said they liked it. And I was just saying to Andrew the other day, I put on some of the episodes that we recorded from the first season. I was listening to like episode 3 or 4 or something. And I was like, man, those episodes were absolutely brutal. Like we've gotten a lot more comfortable in how we do things, but they were very stiff. So if you start from the beginning, don't do that. It's like watching The Office for the first time and you're like, I can't get through those first few episodes. Just power through. You can do it. But we were very happy with everyone telling us that they enjoyed it and with how everyone was taking it. So again, we powered through the first year, posted every single week. We took December off. But here's the statistics, because I'm going to tell you these and not ramble on. At the end of this year, as of the end of December, we actually doubled our yearly downloads. So the amount of downloads we got the first year, this year we doubled it, which I think is pretty
amazing.
Good.
Yeah.
So we got double the amount of downloads that we got the first year, which is fantastic. And we've actually gained more than 50% more listeners every month. So from last year, how many of our listeners we had, it's doubled, which is amazing. Over doubled. We have this is on Spotify. It's not on Apple. Unfortunately, there's not a lot of information you can get from Apple, but on Spotify, we have 574 top fans. Do you know what that means, Andrew?
I'm not sure. I assume
Me
we're in the
neither. I had to look
top
it up. So they don't really tell you specifically exactly what it means on Spotify, but it basically means that you're in the top like 1% of the fans of that show. So there's 574 people that are like in the top 1% of like listening to our show every single week, which is, it's mind blowing. I've had some people tell me that they don't use Spotify, but they just listen to our podcast on it. So maybe those are the people, but there's over 500 people that it's literally one of their favorite things to listen to, which blows my mind because I mean, there's a lot of good music on Spotify.
And here we are. What's wrong with you?
Yeah. Sing to me, Andrew. No, don't sing. And then the last stat that I'll share with you is, so on Buzzsprout. So basically, if you're not familiar with how you run a podcast, we had to learn this a few years ago. We record it, we edit it, and then we have to upload it to a host. And then that host pushes that podcast out to all the streaming services. That's how it works. So the host that we use is Buzzsprout. They are actually one of the top hosts. They host a lot of massive podcasts. They actually host over 120,000 podcasts every year. And our podcast is in the top 10% of those podcasts, which is pretty cool. I mean, like, it's not like top 2% or something. We're not Joe Rogan, but top 10%, that's pretty cool.
Yeah.
Top countries. I'll give you one guess, Andrew. What is the top country that our podcast was listening to?
I would say Canada.
Yeah, Canada. It's actually like by a huge margin. But we'd also like to include United States as second, United Kingdom as third, Australia as fourth, and Sweden as fifth.
Cool. Where's the Zimbabwe list?
It's way down because
we got one guy.
Only Neil.
Good shout out to
guy
Neil
from Zimbabwe. We're actually going to have Neil on to do an interesting fishing fact next year. The podcast is listened to in over 80 countries. That's pretty cool, all around the world. So if you're listening from somewhere other than Ontario or Canada, we appreciate that.
Leave a review and tell us where.
Yeah. I also thought it would be funny. So Spotify, basically, they analyzed our podcast and they gave us a personality, a podcast personality.
Uh-oh. Abrasive.
Yeah. Our podcast personality is the storyteller. I don't know where they got that from. It's not like we just talk about fishing stories all the time, but that's good.
It's not like we usually say like story time.
Yeah, I guess it's because we do say that all the time. Story time. Now, you may be thinking, what are some of our top episodes every year? I'm going to give Andrew a guess. What topic do you think was our best, most downloaded, listened to episode last year?
I would say pike. Pike does really well.
Pike fishing was number one. Our top episode by a lot was an episode we did in May called May the Pike Be With You. See what I did there? May the 4th be with you. May the pike. Anyway, it got a lot of downloads. And we always say like everyone disses pike, but for some reason, everyone loves them. Mm-hmm. I just think it's one of those things that people are too embarrassed to say they like it, but they do. It's like, dude, it's pike, man.
Yeah.
I think people see all these big pictures of just big pike. And that's what they want to catch. So the little ones, the little hammer handles, those are annoying. I get that. But yeah, if you want to learn how to catch big pike, again, we're not like pike connoisseurs, but in our area, we've caught some big ones for our area. If you go up north, the big ones that we caught look like minnows, but down here, we're doing the best we can do. But anyway, got a lot of downloads. Another really good episode was an episode that we did called Spinnerbait Success. I'm going to link all these episodes down below. If you didn't get to listen to them, you can listen to them now, or you can listen to them again. Spinnerbait Success, number 2. Our third most downloaded episode was Small Baits Catch Giant Fish. And that was the episode we did with Great Lakes Finesse. Remember that episode we did with Dan?
Mm-hmm.
Dan from Great Lakes Finesse.
That was a good one.
That was
good information.
Episode. Oh, I learned a lot. That's an episode like that we're going to start doing more of in the new year. But we're going to talk about that. Our fourth best downloaded episode was actually one that Andrew got the ball rolling on. And it was Small Craft Fishing Ontario. That's a show that we did with the Fishing Canada show guys, which was Pete Bowman and Angelo Viola. That was kind of an unreal experience, right, Andrew?
That was, it's funny. We talked about it on that podcast, I think, but when Jesse and I first started the podcast, like 2 years ago, the day we did our first recording, before we started recording, I'm like, Jesse, like if this takes off, and we're like, yeah, but it won't. But if this takes off and we keep going with it, I'll know we've made it when we get to have, when we're either a guest on their show or they're a guest on ours. If they're a guest on our show or the Fishing Canada guys, we've made it. And it was literally pretty much a year to the day when we were talking with Dean, their producer, getting it set up for them to be on our show. Like that.
I think it was like episode 50 or something.
Yeah,
so
it was so cool.
It was cool. I mean, we grew up watching that show, still do. So it's a show that for us, it's very sentimental. So being on the show with them, having them on our show was fantastic, but being on their show, it was so crazy.
And by their show, we don't mean we were on the Fishing Canada TV show. We were
on their podcast.
I'm trying to hook that up with them, but
yeah,
I wish. But no, we were on their podcast, the Outdoor Journal radio podcast.
Yeah. Another awesome podcast to listen to. Again, there's lots, we always say this, our podcast, it's okay. But there's a lot of really good ones out there, and that is one of them. They have a lot of really good information and expert guests that make the episodes very interesting and educational too. So it's not all like just me and Andrew being goofs. You can actually learn something on their podcast. So I thought we would just talk a little bit about podcasting in general. Even if you have no interest in this, I do think it is slightly interesting. And it is just to give me and Andrew a little bit of a pat on our back, so to say, because no one else does it for us. So I'm going to do it right now. Andrew, pay attention. His eyes started glazing white.
I'm looking at my coffee. I'm like, the cup's getting low.
So podcasting, it is very popular now. I remember when podcasting first came out, it was kind of like weird. Everyone's like, oh, listen to this podcast. Everyone's like, that's stupid. Now a lot of people listen to podcasts. Apparently, it reached the number of global listeners is 546.7 million global listeners on podcasts in 2024 so far, which is like an 8% increase from last year. So lots of people are listening to podcasts. And a lot of people listen to podcasts on YouTube as well, which is why we video this podcast. I highly recommend listening to the audio version because it is clean, it is edited, it is juicy, it has sound effects in it. But if you're one of those guys or girls that wants to watch on YouTube, we have made it available to you. So you're welcome.
I just wanted to say, talking about the popularity of podcasts, there was a time when I'm like, I don't want to listen to basically an audiobook when there's music. And then I just got my Spotify Wrapped a few weeks ago. I had listened to 250 minutes of music and 25,000 minutes of podcasts.
Yeah. Podcasts are great. I know if you're listening to this, you probably already realized that because you're listening to a podcast, but I was not a podcast guy. Andrew got me into it. I had listened to some from time to time, but he was always listening to podcasts and he'd be like, oh, this one's interesting. You got to watch this. And I'm just like, and I'm just like blasting Eminem, pretending I'm cool. Just kidding. It's interesting. And this was one thing that we kind of worried about. Podcasts actually have a super, super, super high failure rate. It is bad. So you have the idea, you're like, I want to have a podcast. There's a lot of planning involved. There's some equipment that you have to buy. But generally speaking, you could start a podcast with a few $100. That's it. That's all you need is a mic, a computer. You don't even need a fancy mic. We're using an iPhone to film this. You don't need anything fancy. But despite that, there's a lot of failures. Apparently, this is from some of the stats from a podcast website. They say 90% of podcasts do not publish more than 3 episodes. Well, we're 87 ahead of that. So we're good. the problem is a lot of people don't have a plan. They just kind of like, oh, I want to talk about this. Then after 2 or 3 episodes, like, wow, that's a lot of work and I don't know what I'm going to do next. Like when you're talking about fishing in Ontario, something that we're both very passionate about, there's not enough episodes in a year. If we got paid enough for this and this was a job, we could probably drop 3 or 4 podcasts a week and have guests on, and like you could fill it because it's fishing. Like we love fishing. There's so many different things to fish about. But a lot of people, they're talking about something that there's not a lot of content that they can use, or they're not very good at it. So they end up dropping off after 3 episodes. So we're past that, Andrew. We're good. 10% of podcasters continue producing content beyond 50 episodes. We're past that. We're 40 ahead of that. So that's good. Yeah, it's a very high failure rate. The reason that a lot of people fail: inconsistent publishing, irregular release schedules. We post every single week. Yeah, we took December off last year for like holiday, but we have posted every single Sunday for the last 2 years. That is one thing that I'm going to give me and Andrew a pat on the back for. Another reason people fail is because they are not authentic. Well, what you see is what you get with us. I feel like, we're just chill guys. And if you like that, that's good. This isn't called the exceptionally awesome anglers of Ontario. This is just average. So I think a lot of people relate to that, which I totally get. Being on that topic, I would just like to say, personally, for me and Andrew, I haven't told Andrew yet, but he has to agree. If you want to start a podcast, a fishing podcast, if you start any other podcast, I don't care. We're not going to help you. But if you're going to start a fishing podcast and you're in Ontario, hit us up. We will help you any way we can. Right, Andrew?
Mm-hmm.
Unless you become better than us and take over, then no, we rescind that. But there is such a bunch of niches that need to be filled. If you are good at talking, you have a lot of friends that you could have on as guests. You don't even need a lot of friends. You can just hit up people. You're on social media. You can have your friends on there too. If you can have a podcast talking about something you're passionate about, you don't have to pump them out every week. You can literally have 1 a month, 2 a month. Take off the whole summer if you want. If you want to have a podcast and it's a good fishing podcast that you're going to talk about something you're passionate about, we will be 100% behind you. I thought we'd talk about changes now, Andrew.
Mm-hmm. Scary subject. I don't like change.
All right. So we are changing Andrew's diaper. Just kidding. We are going to be changing stuff about the podcast. And this is more of on a serious note. We are going to be only publishing 2 podcasts a month from now on. So there's going to be a podcast released on the first weekend of every month and on the third weekend of every month. Now, there's a few reasons why we're doing this. We have been doing podcasting now for 2 years, every single weekend. And what I find is we want to create better quality content instead of quantity. We want to have 2 a month, amazing podcasts that you're just like, I cannot wait to hear this guest. We're going to have guests on every single month, sometimes twice a month. Both episodes might be guests. We've done a lot of homework so far. We already have a lot of guests lined up, like fishing guides, people that own charters, people that are legit experts at what they do. They're really, really, really good at fishing. We're going to get some tips out of them, but we're going to dial them back to give tips for average anglers. We're not going to be talking about legit live scope. We're not going to be talking about legit bass boats, nothing like that. These people that we're going to be talking about fishing with, they probably have those things, but we're not going to be talking about that. We're going to really pull the reins on them and be like, all right, dumb it down for us and give us some tips, because a lot of these guys and girls, they started with stuff that we have, stuff that's relatable. Now they have bass boats and live scope and stuff, for example, but we're going to have better quality episodes with very regular guests. How do you feel about that, Andrew?
I think it's good. One thing I wanted to say about it too is, you never want to hear about, I'm going to pat ourselves in the back. Let's say we're your favorite podcast. You don't want to hear the news of, I'm going to be getting less new episodes. That's unfortunate. However, we can't stress enough. We want our quality to be there. And it's just time-wise, it's been a huge effort on our part to get these out consistently. And we want to keep it consistent. On the good side, instead of, re-releasing episodes to kind of like, oh, well, we'll start re-releasing our old ones as a re-edited or re-released version, so it stays weekly, but you're only getting 2 new ones and then 2 re-releases. Personally, it's a pet peeve of mine when podcasts do that, because now I want to just know what the most recent thing is. If I want to listen to something further back, go ahead. That back catalog is there. So if you're concerned about, you want to listen to us, keep your routine of every Monday morning, every other Monday, restart from the old ones. So you can listen to episode 90 next week, episode 1.
Yeah.
So you can fill them in yourself. I know for our listeners, many who have listened in the summertime maybe missed some of our winter episodes. So be sure, check back to see which ones you may have missed from before. that we've recorded, because we recorded all through winter. We recorded, through the other seasons. And if you only listen in the summertime, you have a lot of podcasts that you can catch up on. So don't feel bad. Again, we're going to make sure that this podcast does keep going.
And in the podcast going forward, I know a lot of times when we're talking, we'll be like, oh, I'll link this podcast down below. Always check those out, because if you hadn't listened to them, you can quickly click on the link. It'll take you right to the podcast. You'll be able to listen to that one too. Another thing we're going to be focusing on in the new year is we're going to be making more YouTube videos. We made a few this year. We made 3. We don't have a lot of time, so we only made 3, but we did a walleye one and a muskie. Oh, I guess we did 2. A walleye one and a muskie one, but they turned out really good. We had the drone up. We had underwater footage. They were really good and huge response. Tons of people were like, I want more of these. We're trying to dial back on pushing out podcasts every week so that we can do 2 podcasts a week, but then we can also have time to make video content as well, which we really enjoy doing. And I know a lot of people do as well. So it'll help us do more stuff like that, which, is also entertaining for people. So the third thing I just want to talk about quick, this isn't complaining, but posting a podcast every single week, burnout. Me and Andrew both work full time. As well, on top of that, we have other responsibilities that we both deal with. We don't have time, unfortunately, to do a podcast every single week. It just seems rushed a lot of the times. It has opened a lot of doors for us. I'm not saying there's no value in doing a podcast every single week. There is a lot of doors that it opens for us. And we obviously appreciate everyone that helped us support the cost of running the show. But for doing all the effort of having a podcast every single week, we don't make any money on this podcast. So we're literally doing this for fun. And after 90 episodes, it's becoming a little less fun for us. Not in a bad way. It's just, if we dial back to 2 a month, we can focus, we can have time to prepare really good guests and have really good giveaways and stuff. Me and Andrew will enjoy it more, which will help us keep going. We were going to stop completely. I'm not going to lie. We were going to stop after 2 years and be like, that's it. We want to keep going. A lot of people love it. We're going to have better episodes. We're not going to burn out. We're going to have more time to do what we like doing, video content, and we're going to continue going on. So we appreciate your support. Also, the fact that we'll be able to do video content also means that we're going to be able to offer paying sponsors more value in video and podcast promotion. So we do a lot of sponsorships with small bait manufacturers, which is great. We're still going to be supporting them where we can, but we don't make any money off of those promotions. And we're happy to do that, but we can't do that every single month, because therefore we'd be doing this podcast for absolutely no money. So the fact is, we don't make any money on this podcast at all. We don't want to sound greedy, but it is very time consuming. It's 7 to 10 hours a week. That's another thing, but we do appreciate everyone's support for helping us cover costs, because that is a huge deal. We appreciate all of our Patreon members, 100%.
Jesse just got real with you all.
Yeah, that's pretty much the news. The news in a nutshell: 2 episodes a month, but they're going to be really, really good episodes. I'm going to give you a rundown of some of the episodes. We kind of talked about it, but the schedule got a little bit updated. So in January, we have Ice Hut Operator. We're going to do 1 episode with. We also have the second episode in January. We have Thatcher from Drop Tine Tackle. If you don't know that guy, beast of fishing. He is a guide. He makes lures as well. Very, very knowledgeable when it comes to fishing. We're going to be talking about lake trout fishing, something that we know nothing about, not very much. We also have coming up a full double episode with Angling Art, and he's going to tell you everything. It's going to be the complete double episode of steelhead fishing in Ontario. Angling Art is a beast of steelhead fishing. And our episode last year wasn't one of the most downloaded ones, because it is a niche. It is steelhead fishing, right? But it was very, very good. And I had a lot of people message me and say they absolutely loved it. They wanted him back for another episode. So we got him back. We had to bribe him a bit, but we got him back. We also have on Brian from Halliburton Fishing Guide. He's going to be doing an episode all about walleye fishing, because he is a bit of a hammer, and he's up in the Halliburton
Just
area,
a bit.
obviously. No, he's a beast. He's an absolute hammer of an angler.
And we've had a lot of requests for walleye, but unfortunately, when it's just Jesse and I, we've done the odd walleye trip, but we for years didn't fish walleye. So when we can have awesome guests like Brian come on and tell you like the deal about walleye fishing, like this is the stuff that we want to be able to provide to you guys.
Yeah. And again, we got to fish with him, so we know how entertaining he is. That's going to be an absolute awesome. I might have to blur out a few swear words in that episode, but it's going to be a good episode.
I could see that becoming one of our most listened to episodes, though. I am very excited
Possibly.
for with him.
Yeah.
I'm excited.
We also have an episode that I'm really, really excited for. So we have another Pike episode. And I don't know if you know Matt Martin, but Matt Martin in Ontario, I'd say he's probably one of, I don't want to say the best, but he's one of the best fishing guides in Ontario. And his Instagram is Smooth River Guiding. This guy fishes locally around us. He also fishes Georgian Bay, Kawarthas, all over the place. He fly fishes for steelhead, pike, gar, everything. He does regular fishing too, not just fly fishing, but he is an absolute weapon. Like, I'm looking through the guy's Instagram right now. I'm this huge walleye, massive smallmouth, huge pike, brown trout, another brown trout, big pike. Like, it's just insane the fish that he gets his clients on and that he catches himself. He does a lot of different guiding. We're having him on for a pike episode. He's super stoked because I said, "Do you want to be on the podcast?" Because the guy's an absolute hammer. And he's like, "Absolutely. What's the topic?" I was like, "Northern pike." He's like, "Nice." He's like, "I love pike." I was like, "Me too." So we're excited about that. We're actually going fishing with him. And the cool thing is we're going to fish with him. And then the podcast is getting recorded the next day. So we're going to talk all about it. And he's going to fill us in about all kinds of stuff when it comes to pike fishing and a little bit of fly fishing in there too.
And I'm going to tell you all about the
cool.
40-inch pike I didn't catch the day before.
Our pike episodes are always legit, just super downloaded. So I'm hoping this one, I'm not hoping, I know it's going to be an absolute weapon of an episode. Another really cool episode that we have is Bobby Belmonte. Remember Bobby when our fall smallmouth, muskie, and walleye series? We're actually going to get him on again, but we're going to do a full out bass fishing episode where we're going to talk about smallmouth fishing and a little bit of largemouth. And then for largemouth fishing, we have Brendan from The Perfect Jig. He's going to go through a whole episode on flipping and pitching, a whole episode. And it might be like, I might have to like pull the reins a bit because it might go a bit long. But since there's only 2 episodes a month now, the episodes might go a little longer. I don't even mind. They might be an hour and 10 minutes instead of an hour. They might be an hour and 20 minutes. Who knows? Andrew's like, just make them 2 hours and Jesse will have the same amount of work. Just kidding. We're not doing that. But Brendan from The Perfect Jig, absolutely, it's going to be an awesome episode. The guy is, again, I say that every single one of these guys is an absolute weapon on the water. They're absolutely fantastic. We also have another few episodes. Like, I have almost the whole year filled up with guides already. We also have Travis from Kawartha Fishing Charters as well. He's going to be doing a fall muskie episode or a June muskie episode. I haven't decided yet. Maybe we'll slap him in there in June. Who knows? But anyway, the moral of the story is there's going to be really, really, really good guests this year. And I'm really excited. I'm personally excited for it because I love learning from people that fish a lot. The year is going to be full of awesome episodes. We really appreciate everyone's support again. It's been a heck of a ride, and we do appreciate everyone's support. So I thought we could just briefly cover some of the highlights of our fishing trips so far this year. We're going to keep this super brief. We're not going to go into like anything crazy. But I have a list of some of the best trips that we had. Again, we're average anglers. We had a lot of trips that absolutely sucked. They were terrible. Like everyone, if you are catching fish, like insane fish every time you're out, you're probably like Bob Azumi or something. But for us average anglers, we did fish a lot. We probably fish more than the average person, but not every time you go out, you're going to smash fish. But I thought we could go through some of the trips that we had a good time. Ice fishing for us last year, not good. The ice was sketchy for a lot of people. We only got out 2 times. We actually had a lake trout trip with one of our buddies who fishes a lot of lake trout, but he canceled on us because the ice was sketchy. And that was in like late February. So not a good year. So not a lot of good trips for us. We did catch some fish, but nothing crazy. The first cool trip we had was our pre-spawn pike fishing trip. And I hope in 2025 to replicate this. We went out right after ice out. The ice had just melted. We went out in the sports pal with just the trolling motor on the back. We're fishing some shallow, weedy bays, and we ended up catching a few really nice pike. And we've talked about this many times in the podcast, just fishing jerkbaits really slow. The water temps is like 37, 38 degrees, really slow fishing. It's a grind out there. Your hands are cold. It's like the opposite of late fall fishing. It's just like early spring. It's like the same thing. Everything looks dead and the water's ice cold and the lake looks dead. There's nothing in here. There's no life.
There's less weeds than late fall.
Yeah. Oh, it's the worst. But that is the time when some of those big mama pike come in, and we did pretty good this year. And the second awesome trip that we did a trip with Brad Scott, who is Canadian Cowboy Outdoors. We did our first time ever fishing early season bass. So if you're not familiar, In our area, bass season doesn't open till the 3rd or 4th week of June. But in zone 20, which is Lake Ontario and some other areas, they open it early for 1 or 2 months or something before bass season. So it's like April and the first week of May or something like that. Or maybe it starts in January, I forget. But basically it shuts off the first week of May. The fish are nowhere close to spawning at that point. They're congregated shallow because they're trying to get, some sun on their backs, but they're not anywhere close to spawning. But we had an insane day, right, Andrew?
It was nuts.
It was crazy.
Nuts.
We caught a lot of fish. It was a great day. And Brad Scott, if you don't follow him on Instagram, we'll link him down below. He's such a cool guy. Has like falcons and like
it's nuts.
He's like, he used to work at the Toronto Zoo and like he has such an interesting life.
He does hunting as well. Like he does a lot of stuff. It's a great follow just to keep up with what he's doing. He has some cooking stuff too, like some good recipes. Like he has tons of good content.
Yeah. Actually, I think he's in Florida right now. He goes down to Florida every year. He's like, I'm not done bass fishing. He's like, I bass fish, and just goes down to Florida. Must be nice. I think he's retired. So yeah, that's good. So anyway, that was an awesome trip. And like we mentioned, in May, we did walleye opener with Brian from Halliburton Fishing Guide. Mm-hmm. He put on a clinic and showed it. He spanked us. He's like, this isn't a guided trip. You think I'm going to help you catch fish? He was just like out fishing us all day long. He's like, I don't care. So we watched him catch a lot of walleye. We caught a lot too, but he caught way more. It was like 7-1. It wasn't even fair. The guy is a hammer. So I'm excited for our episode with him coming up.
We did come across some sweet crappie. So I caught a 14-inch crappie too. Black crappie. That was a really awesome highlight of that trip.
It was a cool day because we caught a little bit of everything.
Yeah.
It was pretty
cool. He caught a big pike.
Oh yeah. He caught like almost a 40-inch northern and he didn't even he's like, yeah. We're just like, my PB.
We lost a few hair jigs to muskie that day too.
The next awesome trip that I recall is we did a bass opener trip, which was actually cool because we fished 3 lakes in 1 day, or in 2 days. We camped in the middle. The first day we hit one of the Kawartha lakes. The second day we hit another one. And then the third day we fished like this back lake. The weather was terrible. We were considering canceling the second day because it was like super windy and just rain all day. You know those days when it's like 100% chance all day, just like 10 millimeters an hour. Mm-hmm. It was bad. First day we caught a few. Actually, Andrew caught a pretty good one the first day.
Yeah, I matched my PB for largemouth. It was 4 pounds 3 ounces, and I caught it on the BFS, the micro chatterbait.
Yeah, so it wasn't a total loss, but it was a pretty slow day. And then the second day we decided to go out anyway, and we caught 70 bass in like 7 hours. It was one of those magic days on a back lake when they were hitting top water, and that's all we fished all day was just like top water. A little bit of crankbaits in the deeper areas, but it was just like top water, boom, boom, boom. We caught 65, 70 bass. We lost count after like 70.
And we were still battling winds. Like we couldn't fish a lot of what we wanted to either. Not as effectively. And we still slammed it. Like it was
a fantastic day. We got to go back there next year and film some stuff because that lake, it's almost like a cheat code if you went to that lake and filmed. Yeah. It's like all the fishing shows you see on TV and they're like, wow, how are they catching all these fish? Well, they're on a private lake somewhere that no one fishes. Thought I'd mention quickly, camping trip disasters. We didn't do a lot of camping together, me and Andrew. We did go with Adam and Ben on a walleye trip from Paddleheads. We caught a bunch of walleye. It wasn't anything crazy big. That was a good trip. It did rain that trip. The second time I went camping, I went to Algonquin. It torrentially rained. It was like the last part of a hurricane or something. It rained so bad. Fishing sucked. The next camping trip I went on, I went up near North Bay. It rained again. I had to cancel my trip 2 days early because a huge storm was coming in. And I'm glad I left home because it was a massive storm. It was terrible. And I got home. Terrible. One other trip that I did was I did fish the St. Lawrence River for the first time, which was pretty cool. Did a bit of trolling with Mike from Waterwolf Lures. He caught a nice 44-inch muskie. I caught a small 32-incher. It was a little baby. I was like, 32, that's not bad. He pulls up a 44. I'm like, dang it. That was cool. It's a very cool fishery. It's very cool fishing different water. I love fishing new areas because we're used to fishing the same lakes all the time. So one suggestion would be next year, if you haven't planned all your fishing trips, maybe try fishing not just a different lake, but a different area because it's a very cool experience to fish a different area. And it also helps to fish with someone that fishes that area. So, you're not completely, lost. I think the next awesome day, was that day we went canoe fishing for salmon. Why don't you talk about that? That was a great day. The second time.
Yeah. The first day we got skunked. The next time we went out, there's a bit more activity. And Jesse All the hookups were on Jesse's rod. It was just something about that one spoon he was using. But Jesse's a good guy to go fishing with because for certain species, like carp fishing or salmon fishing, like if we're just trolling or just have our lines like laid out, we take turns. Whoever's rod goes off first, it's their fish. But then after that, we usually try and take turns so we're all having a good time. So Jesse caught a good salmon. Then he hooked into the next one. It hit. And he's like, he just passes the rod up to the front of the canoe. And of course, that was the bigger one. So I landed that one. And then Jesse caught a third one that same night. But this is all in like an hour. Well, the strikes, we fished maybe 2 hours that night. And all the strikes happened in like 20 minutes. But it's so much fun when you hook into like a 20-pound plus fish, like 20 to 30-pound fish in a canoe. And you're just like sitting there and
at night. It's
just open water, so you don't have to worry about it wrapping your line around or anything most of the time. But yeah, it's just the trolling motor. It's just turning you around. We're like, oh, let's chase it down. It's a trolling motor. And
yeah, they call it the salmon sleigh ride because it just pulls your canoe around. It's pretty fun.
Super fun. Yeah.
So that was awesome. And again, we've been doing that for years. That day was one of our better days of just like the most action in like 1 hour. The fish were just swirling around. And it was funny because we were fishing in a canoe with a trolling motor on the back. And this other guy had just pulled in with this like super fancy boat and they were live scoping salmon and trying to cast spoons in front of them. And we caught 3 and they didn't catch any. And as they were trolling out, I was just like, oh, I had a fish on. And I was like, look, no live scope. They did not like that at all. The next trips I thought we just mentioned briefly was fall muskies. Obviously, we went out with Jen and Scott from Fin Addiction. They took us out on their pontoon boat. That was cool fishing out of a pontoon boat for muskie. They know that lake very well. Moira Lake, they know it very well. They knew all the spots. They put us on some really good spots, and I ended up catching a 44-inch, which was nice. Muskie on a glide bait. Great day. Caught a little baby one too. It could have even been eaten by the big one. That's how small it was. That was a cool day, and it was cool. We got to spend some time with this old guy named Bob, who's a guy from Muskies, Canada. I don't know anything about him, but he was just this funny old guy. And all day long, he was just laughing at our jokes, just like an old man. He's like, it's just funny.
Because Jesse and I, when we're fishing, a lot of the time, it's just like this podcast. We're saying the same goofy stuff, sometimes more goofy and ridiculous.
So it's terrible.
And yeah, so you don't want to do it. But we're up there on the bow, just like casting around on this pontoon boat, and we'd make jokes to ourselves just because that's what we do. Just randomly, you just hear Bob in the back, and it just made us die laughing every time because you kind of forget that he's there because he's so quiet, and then all of a sudden he just like joins in with the ruckus laughter, and it was awesome.
I'd say probably Andrew's most memorable trip was our St. Clair trip when Andrew caught his PB 50.5-inch muskie.
Insane.
Very insane. I am very, very excited to go back there again.
Me too.
Just the amount of muskie in that system it's mind blowing. Like you could fish out there and in 1 week have a good chance of catching a 50.
Yeah.
In the Kawarthas, I've talked to guys that are legit fishing out there all the time for years and they've never even seen a 50. It's a completely different fishery. I'm not saying there aren't 50s in the Kawarthas. There are, but the amount of 50s in St. Clair, it's insane.
Like I said before, like the perspective of you'll hear maybe 1 to 3 50s being caught in all of the Kawarthas a year. And then 3 muskies are caught in a single day out in St. Clair. Like that's no one bats an eye. That's the difference. It's just the number of large muskie out
54s.
There. Yeah. 40s out there are nothing. Kawartha, you hit over 40, they're like, hey, that's a good fish. Out there, they're like, it's a small one. Until you hit, 47, like no one really cares.
I caught a 40. I think it was 40.5. And they were just like, eh. I was like, what? Yeah, you catch a 40 in the Kawarthas, and that's a nice fish. Like, oh, that's nice. I'd say, like, honestly, in my opinion, from fishing the Kawarthas a lot, you catch a 40, that's like 40 is the number you want to hit. That's a good fish for the Kawarthas. 44, 45, that's a really good fish. And then anything like 47, 48, that's a giant in the Kawarthas. Now, there are bigger fish than that in the Kawarthas, but usually they're like long, skinny fish. There are some big fat ones. But out there on St. Clair, it's like you have to bump everything up a few inches because you catch a 45 out there and everyone's like, eh. It's just so crazy. If you want to hear more about fishing in St. Clair, we have a whole podcast about that where Andrew tells the whole story. It's a great episode. So if you haven't listened to that, I'll put a link down below. You can listen to it. And then the last trip that I did that was really good is when I fished. I already talked about it last episode with Travis from Kawartha Fishing Outfitters Charters. And he got me on 3 muskie in December, like the first week of December. There was ice floating in the water. Don't have a lot of confidence fishing in that cold of water, but I learned so much from him. I'm very happy that he's going to be on the podcast because he is very, very knowledgeable when it comes to muskie fishing. I'm not a proud man when it comes to fishing, especially muskie fishing. I always tell people I'm fishing with, I know how to fish, but if you see me doing something or if you have a suggestion, please speak up.
Mm-hmm.
And Travis did that. I was just like, dude, I know how to fish. I catch muskie, but I want to learn. I'm not that good at it. Like I want to learn how to do it better. I have to work very hard to catch muskie myself. Some guys are just, they got a horseshoe up their butt or whatever, but I have to work very hard. So give me tips, the cadence of how I'm reeling in or how I'm jerking the rod or rod positioning or how I'm supposed to stand for a hook set. Like when it comes in, like all these little tips, gold. Stuff like that would take you years to learn on your own, or you might not even figure it out. Or just like even position when you're standing or how to figure out properly. If you don't get that down fast, you'll lose a lot of fish and you'll get frustrated. Be like, I had a terrible season again. I missed this many fish. Go with a guide once. I know it's expensive, but go with a guide once and you'll learn like years of like bad habits just disappear. It's amazing. So I highly recommend it. But if you can't afford a guide, that's what this podcast is for, because we are going to be interviewing guides. So you will be basically getting a free guided trip without the fishing part in it, but at least the knowledge will be up there.
Mm-hmm.
So
if you have the opportunity though, again, before this year, I'd never been with a guide ever. Now we've been able to fish with them like a few times this year, and it's been incredible. And like Jesse says, you learn years of experience fishing one day with these guys. It's absolutely true. And I know that for the average person, when you look and like, oh, it costs a few $100s. Absolutely, it does. And you might think it's a tough pill to swallow. But I firmly believe that if you do your research, you pick a good guide for something that you want to learn more about, and you go fishing with him, you're not going to regret it after it. You're going to take everything you learned that day, and you'll see the results of that. You're on your next fishing trip in the next year that you're fishing. Like you'll notice a difference on yourself.
Yeah. And you go with a guide and you tell them, listen, I want this trip. I want to catch fish, obviously, but I want to learn. This is a learning trip for me, and just grill them the whole day. Just be like, why are we fishing here? Like, why is this spot special? Like, what should I be doing? What should I be looking for? If you catch fish, that's just a bonus. Pick their brain and learn. If you want to just go out and catch fish with a guide and just be like, I just want to go catch fish, they can do that too. If you want to be like, listen, I'm trying to improve as an angler here. I want to be able to take this information I learned today and apply it on my own lake and find my own spots and catch my own fish. They can teach you too. And again, there's a lot of good guides that will have no problem doing that for you. Anyway, that was our year. Fantastic year. We hope that you had a great fishing year too. A lot of people message us with fishing pictures. And I would just like to encourage you right now, if you've never done that, that makes our day. I love when people send us fishing pictures, especially when they tell us that something that they heard on our podcast helped them catch a fish. Do that. We also really love when people send us a message on Instagram, Facebook, YouTube. If you don't have that stuff, you can even email us. The email link is down below. Just email us and be like, hey, I love the podcast. That's all you have to say. It just keeps us going. We see the downloads on the statistics, but when someone actually says like, hey, I like this, thanks a lot, guys. I appreciate it. It means so much more to us. It makes those numbers come to life. So we appreciate it. So again, it's been a great year. We're really, really, really thankful that you are listening to this podcast, and we're going to do our best to keep going in the new year with awesome episodes that are going to be twice a month.
Mm-hmm. And
what are your last words for the year, Andrew?
Well, I just wanted to say that we've talked about like the changes that are happening to the podcast, but we haven't talked about other stuff. There is other things coming down the pipes as well that we haven't mentioned. There is some exciting stuff that we are working on to bring out to you. That's, you're losing some of the podcast every week, but that's giving us the time to bring out other things to you that we haven't told you about. So I'm not going to announce them yet. It's not my place right now to announce them, but there is more coming down, and you will be kept informed of them as they come down the pipe. But yeah, I'm very excited about this next year because of what we are going to do next year. I am super pumped.
Andrew and me have stuff that's been in the works for over a year. We finally are getting going.
We've had things that we've wanted to do
for a long time.
And yeah, like one thing here, I'm not going to make any promises, but one thing is merch. And we just don't have the time to get that going. We're hoping that we're working on it. So hopefully this year we'll have a little bit of merch coming your way. Again, we'll keep you posted as to what's going to be available. Maybe limited quantities, but that's our plan. And the only way to do that is we need time to start, finding finding ways to get that out to you too.
As well. And just to add to that about doing other stuff is we also have to start taking on sponsors as well that actually pay so that we can have some money coming in to put towards other things that are happening. So next year you are going to notice a little bit of a shift from a lot of the local bait makers and stuff. We will still be supporting them as much as we can. But at the same time, we do have to take on paying sponsors as well. They will always be fishing related. It's not going to be like, adult diapers, it's not going to be like that. They're going to be fishing related
mattress
sponsors.
Comfortable?
Yeah. But we're going to be taking on some sponsored episodes so that we can have some funds that help cover the podcast as well and help us do other things for the podcast. So I'm really excited for next year. It's going to be fantastic. Before we end this episode, this is going to be the quote of the year. To quote my friend Dory, just keep swimming.